My own father said that about me, thinking I had already hung up. They were enjoying a European vacation I paid for, while secretly plotting to take my grandmother's house. They had no idea who they were dealing with. What do you do when the people who are supposed to love you most become your biggest threat? Let me know what you think in the comments. My name is Calla Rhodes, and this is the story of how I sold the house they thought was theirs. The morning sun of late May slanted through the original casement windows of the breakfast nook, casting long, dancing rectangles of light across the heart pine floors. Out here, nestled in the green embrace of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the world felt still, peaceful. It was a quiet that hummed with life, the distant chatter of a wren, the rustle of a black bear lumbering through the rhododendron thicket at the edge of the property. This house, Blackwood Manor, my grandmother Genevieve had called it, was the only place my lungs ever seemed to work properly. My stylus moved in a smooth practice sweep across the tablet, refining the roofline of a modern lake house for a new client. It was my work, my passion, but doing it here, in her house, felt different. It felt like honoring a legacy. Every inch of this place was a testament to her impeccable taste and fierce independence. And for the last 3 years, since she'd left it to me and me alone, it had become my sanctuary, my pride. I had poured tens of thousands of my own earnings into it, meticulously paying the hefty property taxes that made my father's eyes water, and personally overseeing the restoration of these very floors, a project Lee had dismissed with a wave of his hand. It's an unnecessary expense, Calla. No one's looking at the floors. But Genevieve had, and I did. A familiar low-grade tension tightened my shoulders, a phantom sensation that always appeared when I thought of my parents, Lee and Marin. They were currently 5 weeks into a 6-week art and architecture tour of Spain and Italy. The title was their invention, the funding almost entirely mine. The argument had been a classic of the genre. I had stood my ground, refusing their suggestion phrased as a brilliant collaborative idea to take out a home equity line of credit on my house. But it's for an investment in our cultural education, sweetie. It would enrich us all. When that failed, the real guilt trip began. A week of heavy sighs, martyred silences, and the grand finale, my mother's tearful monologue over the phone about how they'd never truly gotten to live, you see, because they had me so young. They had sacrificed their dreams for me. The unspoken conclusion hung in the air, you owe us. So I caved. I wired the money, draining my travel fund and a good portion of my savings, all for them to post filtered photos on Facebook, clinking wine glasses in front of monuments I had dreamed of seeing myself. A knot of irritation tightened in my stomach as I glanced out at the expansive deck. A single board right in the main walkway was cupping, splintering. It was one of the few contributions my father, a failed custom home builder, had insisted on making last fall, a weekend of him supervising a day laborer while offering unsolicited critiques of my design choices. Now his handiwork was failing. I needed to know the specific brand of industrial sealant he'd used before I hired someone to fix it properly. With a sigh, I pushed my chair back. "Hey, G," I said to the sleek gray smart speaker on the granite countertop, a gift from my brother Reese. "Call Dad Cell." The device's light ring swirled blue. After a series of clicks and a faint oceanic hiss, his voice came through tinny and impatient. "Calla." "What is it? Hey, Dad. Sorry to bother you. Quick question." I explained the issue with the deck board. He sighed, a gust of pure annoyance blowing across the Atlantic. "It's in the filing cabinet, my old desk in the guest room, folders labeled exterior." "Honestly, Calla, I'm walking into Arzak right now. Do you know what it takes to get a reservation here?" "Okay, thanks. Enjoy your dinner." "I'll try. Gotta go, Calla. This is costing a fortune." The line went silent. I turned to the electric kettle, which was just beginning to hiss. As I filled a mug with water, I noticed the blue light on the speaker was still on. A solid, unblinking ring. Odd. I figured it was just a glitch, a delayed disconnection from the international call, and then his voice crackled back to life. Not to me, to my mother. He must have hit a button on his phone, unmuting the connection without realizing the call was still live on my end. I swear that girl can find a problem in paradise. A deck board. The world is ending. The mug in my hand trembled. I set it down carefully on the counter, my movements suddenly slow and deliberate. Is she ever going to just be grateful Genevieve leaving her that house went straight to her head? My breath hitched. I stood frozen, a statue, in my own kitchen, grateful she owes us. All that money for her fancy architecture degree, the car we had to co-sign for. Now she's sitting on a gold mine, a $2 million property, while we're scraping by. It should have been ours, Marin. Genevieve knew I could have turned that property into a real legacy. The words, my father's jealousy of me, it was a truth I'd always felt but never heard spoken so plainly. He wasn't just my father. He was a competitor who had lost. Marin's voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial sly. Well, the lawyer said the trust is ironclad, so we have to be smart. When we get back, we push for the conservatorship angle. We'll say she's overwhelmed, that she can't manage a property this valuable on her own. With her anxiety, it wouldn't be a hard sell. Conservatorship. The word wasn't just a word. It was a cage. My blood ran cold. Every time they'd asked if I was okay, if the stress was too much, if I was taking on too many clients, it wasn't concern, it was reconnaissance. They were gathering evidence. It's the only way. She's been a burden since day one, always needing something. Now she can finally be useful. That house is our retirement, our future. She's just the gatekeeper, and it's time to get the key. Burden. The single syllable detonated in the quiet of the room. It landed not like an insult, but like a confirmation of my deepest, most secret fear. It echoed off the reclaimed wood, bounced off the custom cabinetry, and settled deep in my bones. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a sob. My legs gave out. I stumbled toward the speaker, my finger jabbing at the top. G-stop, hang up. The blue light vanished. Silence rushed back in, vast and terrifying. I slid down the cabinets until I was crumpled on the floor. The beautiful, warm, restored hardwood, the floor I had lovingly brought back to life, felt as cold and unforgiving as a morgue slab. This was not my sanctuary. This was a trap, and I was the prize. I don't know how long I stayed on the floor. Time seemed to warp and stretch, pulling apart like heated glass. The initial shock, that raw physical blow of the words, slowly, glacially began to cool, and in its place, something else started to burn. It was a rage so pure and so absolute, it felt like a forge inside my chest, melting down a lifetime of confusion, of self-doubt, of trying to be enough, and recasting it into something hard and sharp and dangerously clear. The next 24 hours were a blur of motion. I couldn't stay still. I wandered the house, my house, but saw it with new eyes. The antique grandfather clock in the hall didn't chime with comforting familiarity. It ticked like a bomb. The family photos on the mantelpiece felt like a gallery of strangers, their smiling faces a grotesque masquerade. I ran my hand along the cool, smooth soapstone of the countertops Genevieve and I had picked out together. Her legacy, a legacy my parents saw as nothing more than a cash machine for their retirement. In her study, my fingers traced the spines of her books on art history and design theory. My eyes landed on a silver frame I hadn't looked at closely in years. It was a photo of me at my college graduation, my arm linked with Genevieve's. We were both beaming. I picked it up and my breath caught. Tucked into the back, almost hidden, was a small folded piece of her personal stationery. Her elegant architectural script was unmistakable. For my Calla who builds beautiful things. Never let anyone tear you down. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry finally fell hot and fast, splashing onto the glass. But they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of rage, of gratitude. It was a message from the past, a final piece of armor, from the one person who had always unconditionally been in my corner. The grief hardened into resolve. They called me a burden. Fine. I would show them just how heavy a burden could be. My hands were shaking, but my mind was a razor. I knew who I had to call. Not a stranger from a Google search. An ally, a weapon. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying to a contact I hadn't needed in this way before. The phone rang twice before she picked up. She said, her voice warm and familiar, Calla Rhodes. To what do I owe the honor? Did you finally finish that ridiculous restoration project, Sloan? I need a lawyer. The warmth in her voice vanished, replaced by the immediate focused concern of a shark that smells blood in the water. What happened? I laid it all out. The trip I paid for the phone call, the smart speaker, the words, burden, conservatorship, get the key. I recited their conversation verbatim, the sentences tasting like poison in my mouth. I didn't cry. My voice was eerily steady. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Sloane finally spoke, her voice was lethally calm. Calla, breathe. Okay, just take a breath. They are scum. We knew that. But this is next-level scum. Scum with a plan. And a conservatorship is a scare tactic, yes, but it's a real one, so we need to move faster and a hell of a lot smarter. I could hear the frantic clicking of her keyboard in the background. First thing, document everything. Write down the conversation exactly as you remember it. Date it. Time it. That's your inciting incident. That's our cornerstone. She took a breath. Now for the good news. Legally, they have no standing. None. They aren't tenants. They're guests. You've paid every bill, every tax, every single repair. You have a mountain of evidence proving you are the sole responsible party for this property. Their only weapon, their only one, is that family court angle. The narrative of the poor, overwhelmed daughter who can't handle her inheritance. So what do? We take that weapon away from them. We prove that you are the most competent, decisive, and financially solvent homeowner in the entire state of North Carolina. We don't just defend Calla, we attack. Attack. The word resonated with the fire in my gut. As Sloane talked about legal strategies and asset protection, my mind, the mind of an architect, was already working on a different kind of plan. It wasn't just about defending, it was about raising the entire battlefield. My work meant I knew the Asheville property market like the back of my hand. I knew the players, I knew the developers, and I knew the one my father hated most of all. Axiom Development. A memory flared in my mind, hot and vivid. Last Thanksgiving, right here in this dining room. A local news story came on about Axiom getting approval for a new ultra-modern hotel downtown. My father's face had turned a blotchy, furious red. They are vandals. Architectural sacrilege. They desecrate historic neighborhoods with their soulless glass boxes, all for a quick profit. There's no respect for history, for craftsmanship. A slow, wicked idea began to bloom in my mind. A truly venomous flower. This wouldn't just be a sale. It would be a statement. A message delivered via bulldozer and steel beam. After I hung up with Sloane, I walked over to Genevieve's antique writing desk. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was no longer in charge. The rage was the fuel, but the architect, the planner, the builder was now at the controls. I pulled out a fresh yellow legal pad and a pen. I wasn't sketching a house. I was designing a demolition. At the top of the page, I wrote Blueprint, Phase 1 Asset Liquidation, Sell the House, Fast, an off-market private deal, and it had to be Axiom. The sale itself would be my response, written in a language of modernism and progress that would be poison to my father's antiquated ego. Phase 2, Strategic Retreat, a new life. Far enough away for a clean break, close enough to manage the logistics of the escape. I typed best cities on the East Coast into my browser, scrolling past places with shared memories. Then I saw it. Charleston, South Carolina. Historic, beautiful coastal. A place of warmth and salt air. A place that would be mine. Chosen, not inherited. Phase 3, Digital Ghost Protocol. Sloane had mentioned asset protection. I would take it a step further. New bank accounts at a Charleston-based credit union, a new phone, a new number, a new email address they couldn't possibly guess. I would build a digital fortress around my new life, leaving my old accounts active only as listening posts, to monitor the inevitable shockwave. Phase 4, The Brother Problem. My stomach twisted. Reese, my sweet, funny, perpetually broke younger brother, still a student at UNC Chapel Hill. His tuition, his rent, all paid by Lee and Marin. He was their financial hostage. Bringing him into this now would endanger him and compromise the entire operation. He was a variable I couldn't control. A wave of guilt washed over me, but I pushed it down. I had to act first. I had to secure my own oxygen mask before I could help him with his. The fallout with Reese would be painful. but the fallout from my parents' plan would be catastrophic for both of us. My pen moved steadily, my handwriting crisp and precise. The page filled with timelines, checklists, contacts. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt a sliver of control. I was no longer the girl cowering on the floor. I was the architect, and I was about to design my own escape. The architect in me took over completely. Grief and rage were the clients, the blueprint was the project, and the timeline was immediate. There was no room for hesitation. Every action had to be precise, deliberate, and silent. I was becoming a ghost in my own life. My first call was to Eliza Vance, a top agent at a luxury brokerage in Asheville. We weren't close friends, but we'd worked on a few projects together, and I knew she was two things above all else: fiercely competent and impeccably discreet. We met for coffee at a place well outside the usual business lunch circuit. "Calla, you look like you haven't slept in a week. What's this about?" "You said it was urgent. I need to sell my house, Eliza. Off market. I need it done in the next 30 days, and I have a specific buyer in mind." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. "Blackwood Manor." "But you love that house. 30 days!" "Calla, that's an aggressive timeline, and a targeted sale it's a non-negotiable condition. The buyer is Axiom Development. I need you to set up a meeting with Julian Croft. Just him. And everyone involved signs an NDA so airtight it could survive re-entry from orbit." Eliza stared at me, her expression a mixture of shock and professional curiosity. She knew my father's reputation in the local building community, and she certainly knew his vocal hatred for Axiom. She didn't ask why. She just nodded a slow, calculated gesture. "All right. Julian Croft it is. I'll make the call. But Calla, whatever this is, be careful." The meeting was set for 2 days later at the lobby bar of the Olympian, a sleek modern hotel that felt like neutral territory, Axiom's turf, really. I walked in wearing a black sheath dress and the armor of my professional demeanor. Julian Croft was exactly as I'd pictured, late 30s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car, with a restless, intelligent energy that seemed to consume all the oxygen around him. He stood as I approached his handshake, firm and brief. "Miss Rhodes, thank you for meeting me. I'll admit your agent's call was intriguing." We sat. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I slid a slim portfolio across the table. "Mr. Croft," I began, "I know your firm's portfolio. I also know my property at 18 Blackwood Lane. It's one of the largest private parcels bordering the National Forest Preserve. The house is historic, but the real value is the land." He opened the portfolio. Inside wasn't the usual glossy real estate photography. It was data, zoning information, detailed survey maps highlighting elevation and buildable envelopes. And on the last page, 3 conceptual sketches I had drawn myself, ghostly outlines of a sleek, multi-unit modernist structure integrated into the hillside, almost invisible from the road. I was speaking his language not of memory and charm, but of opportunity and square footage. He looked up from the sketches, his eyes sharp with a new level of interest. "You're an architectural designer, Miss Rhodes. You're selling your own home to a developer, and you've prepared a pitch." I met his gaze without flinching. "I believe in maximizing an asset's potential. My grandmother who left me the house valued vision above all else. The house has served its purpose for my family. Its future is something new." A slow smile spread across his face. He was impressed not by the sentiment, but by the utter lack of it. "I see. Well, your property has been on our dream list for years. Given the unique circumstances and your preparedness, what's your number?" The market value was hovering around $2.2 million. For a rushed private all-cash sale, I knew I'd take a hit. "I can have $1.9 million in an escrow account by the end of the week. Close in 30 days," I countered without blinking. $2 million. You cover all closing costs, and the closing date is mine to set any time within the next 4 weeks with 48 hours notice from me. And the NDA is absolute. We stared at each other for a long moment. It was a high-stakes poker game, and I was bluffing with my entire life. 1.95, and you have a deal, Miss Rhodes. I shook it. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Croft." While the lawyers began their quiet work, I started the logistical warfare. The following Friday, I emailed my office saying I was taking a much-needed long weekend for some personal creative inspiration. Then I drove east. 4 hours later, the misty mountains were gone from my rearview mirror, replaced by the flat, sun-bleached landscape of the low country. Charleston's air was thick with salt and history. It felt like a different planet. It felt free. That weekend, I found it a stunning 2-bedroom apartment for lease in a historic building south of Broad Street, with tall windows that overlooked the harbor. I signed the papers and paid the deposit on the spot. It was the first move that was entirely thrillingly my own. In a bright, airy Charleston coffee shop, surrounded by the cheerful chatter of strangers, I executed the digital ghost protocol. Fueled by espresso and a cold, burning sense of purpose, I systematically moved my life. I opened checking and savings accounts with a local credit union. I walked into a Verizon store and walked out with a new phone and a South Carolina number. And I spent 2 hours creating a new, unguessable email address and meticulously forwarding every important digital document from my old life to my new one, creating an unassailable archive. Every click of the mouse was another brick in the firewall I was building around myself. The hardest part came when I returned to Asheville. The purge. I hired a discreet high-end moving and storage company, the kind that specializes in art and wine collections. For 3 days I lived among colored stickers, sorting a lifetime of memories into neat, disposable categories. Green was for me, my books, my clothes, my files, my future, all destined for Charleston. Blue was for Genevieve. Her favorite paintings, the Biedermeier armchair from her study, a box of her personal letters. These weren't just things. They were her essence. They were going to a secure, climate-controlled art storage facility registered under a newly formed trust in her name. Untouchable. Red was for them. For Lee and Marin, their clothes, their furniture, their books on European art. All of it was inventoried, photographed, and destined for a standard 10 by 20 foot storage unit on the industrial side of town. The first 6 months were prepaid, an act of generosity that felt more like a final dismissive transaction. On the last day, in the back of a dusty closet in the guest room, I found it, a long cardboard tube. I pulled off the plastic cap and unrolled the contents on the floor. They were blueprints, my father's blueprints, a grandiose, absurdly complex plan for an expansion of Blackwood Manor he'd designed years ago, full of unnecessary turrets and a ridiculous 3-car garage. A dream he never had the money or the talent to build. I saw his familiar, arrogant signature in the title block. It wasn't a memory of a loving father. It was the artifact of a man whose ambition had curdled into a lifelong resentment that had landed squarely and finally on me. I rolled the blueprints back up my movements precise. I took a red sticker and pressed it firmly onto the cardboard tube. The deal with Axiom moved through its legal channels with the silent, predatory speed of a shark. The closing date was set. 1 week before my parents' flight was scheduled to land back in the States. Every day that passed, every item I tagged with a colored sticker, the reality of my actions became heavier, more concrete, and with it, a gnawing, acid-churning guilt that had nothing to do with my parents and everything to do with my brother, Reese. He was the collateral damage in this war I was about to wage. As I packed, memories of him were everywhere. A faded UNC sweatshirt he'd left here last Christmas, now destined for a red-tagged box. A ridiculous chipped coffee mug he'd won at a county fair proclaiming him the #1 brother. I found myself holding it, the cheap ceramic cool against my palm, and the weight of what I was doing nearly buckled my knees. Lee and Marin held his financial strings. The moment the news broke, I knew they would pull them tight, strangling his education, his independence, all to punish me. He would be their pawn, their leverage. I couldn't let that happen. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed his number. I had rehearsed this call a dozen times in my head, and my lines still felt like lies. "Hey Cal, what's up, hey you? How are things? Is the semester wrapping up okay? Yeah, pretty much just drowning in finals prep. You know how it is. Hey, weird question though." He hesitated. "Dad called me yesterday from Italy, asked if I'd heard from you, said you were being distant." "Everything okay?" I shot through my veins. They were already probing, testing the network for weaknesses. My voice was a little too tight when I answered. Everything's fine, just buried in work. End of quarter deadlines. A plausible lie. Listen, Reese, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to just go with it. Okay, his cheerfulness evaporated, replaced by the cautious suspicion of someone who grew up in our family. Oh, Kay, what is it? Do you have your own bank account? One that Mom and Dad don't have access to, that they can't see? No, why would I? They just transfer my rent and stuff into my main account every month. Calla, what is this about? You're kind of freaking me out. I squeezed my eyes shut, picturing his confused face. I hated this. I hated lying to him. I can't explain right now, but I need you to do this for me. I want you to go to the bank, a different bank, not the one they use, and open a new private checking account. Today, and then I need you to send me the account details. Don't ask why yet. Just, please, Reese, trust me. The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. I could hear him breathing, thinking. He knew me. He knew I wouldn't ask for something this strange without a damn good reason. All right, Cal. All right, I'll do it. But you owe me a serious explanation. Soon, I promise. Thank you. Telling him the truth would have put him in an impossible position, forcing him to lie to them, to choose a side, before the battle had even begun. So I made a preemptive strike. I called Sloan. I need to set up a trust for Reese, and I need to fund it the second the house sale closes. Calla, that's a huge chunk of your seed money. $100,000. That's your buffer, your security for starting over. It's non-negotiable, Sloan. It's not a choice. It's a necessity. This is my mess, and I will not let him get caught in the shrapnel if I can help it. She didn't argue. She understood. The day before the movers were scheduled to arrive was my last day of quiet in the house. The colored tags were everywhere, a silent, heartbreaking inventory of a life about to be fractured. Green, blue, red. Me, Genevieve, them. I walked through the echoing rooms, the air thick with the smell of dust and cardboard. The profound sense of loss that washed over me wasn't for my parents. It was for the idea of them, for the family I had spent 28 years pretending we were. I ended up on the deck, the one my father had sealed. I sank into one of the Adirondack chairs and looked out at the ancient sleeping shapes of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The view, which had always brought me such a deep sense of peace, now just looked final. I wasn't just selling a house. I was performing a surgery on myself without anesthetic. I was amputating a gangrenous part of my life, a part that was poisoning the rest of me. It was brutal, and it was bloody, but it was the only way to survive. I sat there for hours until the sun began to dip below the peaks, painting the sky in strokes of violent orange and bruised purple. Then I heard it. The low rumble of a diesel engine, the crunch of tires on the long gravel driveway. I stood up, my back straight, my hands steady. The moving trucks had arrived. The point of no return was here. The moving company was ruthlessly efficient. A team of 4 men, polite and detached, descended upon the house and began the methodical process of erasing my life from it. They followed the colored tags with the precision of soldiers following orders. Green truck for Charleston. Blue-tagged art pieces crated with reverent care for the climate-controlled vault. Red truck for the industrial storage unit on the other side of town. I watched from the porch, a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands, feeling like a ghost haunting my own demolition. I wasn't a homeowner watching her life get packed away. I was a project manager overseeing a successful, heartbreakingly clean extraction. The morning of the closing was unnaturally bright and clear. I stood in front of the mirror in my now empty bedroom, the acoustics strange and hollow. I had laid out my armor the night before, a dark gray suit sharply tailored with a crisp silk shell underneath. It was a uniform of competence, of unassailable professionalism. A woman wearing this suit did not have emotional breakdowns. She closed deals. Sloan, a vision of legal authority in a navy pinstripe, met me at the door of the downtown law office. She had driven in from Charlotte that morning, her presence a silent, solid wall at my back. "You ready for this?" I nodded, unable to speak. The closing room was exactly as I'd imagined, sterile, airless smelling of old paper and new carpet. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the fluorescent lights overhead like a dark, still lake. Julian Croft and 2 members of his legal team were already there, their portfolios arranged in neat, intimidating stacks. They were professional detached, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. This was just another transaction for them, another parcel of land to be conquered and transformed. The blizzard of paperwork began. The title agent, a woman with a weary but kind face, guided me through the storm. Sign here, initial here, and 1 more signature here, please. My hand moved robotically, my signature a series of sharp, familiar angles that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. With each stroke of the pen, I was dismantling my past, severing a legal tie to the only home I'd ever truly loved. And with each stroke, I was funding my future, buying my freedom. Then it was done. The title agent smiled faintly. She said, "Congratulations, Miss Rhodes. The wire transfer has been initiated." My new phone tucked away in my purse gave a soft, almost imperceptible buzz. I excused myself from the room, my heels clicking on the tile floor of the hallway. In the sterile quiet of the ladies' room, I pulled out the phone, my hand shaking slightly. I opened the new banking app, and there it was, a number so large with so many commas, it seemed like a glitch in the matrix. $1,950,000. For a dizzying second, the floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. A wave of sheer terror and wild, terrifying exhilaration washed over me. It was real. It was done. The house was no longer mine. My fingers flew across the screen, my movements practiced from the night before. Before a single dollar could be spent on anything else, on my new life, on furniture, on my future, I had a promise to keep. I navigated to the wire transfer screen, entered the account details for the trust Sloan had established, and typed in the amount $100,000. I pressed confirm. A small green check mark appeared. Your transfer is complete. My first act as a wealthy woman was to give a piece of that wealth away. My first act was to build a firewall around my brother. I didn't drive back to the house just yet. There was one last errand. I drove to a FedEx office across town. Inside the crisp cardboard envelope, I placed 2 items, the key to the storage unit, now housing my parents' past, and a packet containing the rental agreement and the receipts showing 6 months paid in full. I wrote the shipping label in neat block letters, the recipient Mr. and Mrs. Leland Rhodes, the address the Grand Hotel Miramare in Rome, a 5-star establishment where they were currently enjoying the final leg of their trip courtesy of their burden. Then I drove back to Blackwood Manor one last time. The moving trucks were gone. The silence was absolute, a physical presence that pressed in on me. My footsteps echoed on the bare floors as I walked through the empty rooms, each one a hollowed-out memory. I ended up in the living room, standing before the grand stone fireplace, the place where my father had always held court during holidays, dispensing his opinions like royal decrees. Taped to the center of the heavy wood mantel, I left the first part of my message. It was a single high-gloss 8x10 photo, an architectural rendering I downloaded from Axiom's public portfolio. It was their vision for the property, the Blackwood Terraces, a sleek, minimalist co-living complex of glass and steel that would rise from the ashes of Genevieve's classic craftsmen. It was everything my father despised. Beneath it I placed the note, a single sheet of thick, crisp cardstock, the words typed in a cold, impersonal font. I heard the conversation. "I know you think I've always been a burden. I decided to lighten your load. This is what the future of your legacy looks like. The key to your past is on its way to your hotel in Rome. Enjoy your retirement." I took one last look around, then walked out the front door, not bothering to lock it behind me. It wasn't my door to lock anymore. My car was packed with just a single suitcase, my laptop bag, and a box of Genevieve's letters. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine humming to life. I put the car in drive and pulled away, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I did not look back. I drove east into the afternoon sun toward Charleston. The miles blurred together. The mountains receded. The landscape flattened. Somewhere over the state line on a long, empty stretch of highway, it hit me. A wave of something immense and overwhelming. I pulled the car over onto the gravel shoulder, the engine still running. I didn't cry. It was something deeper, heavier than tears. It was the sheer crushing weight of what I had done. It was necessary. It was justified. But it was also violent. It was a definitive, brutal end to the story of my family. I had saved myself, but I had to burn down the whole village to do it. I rested my forehead against the cool plastic of the steering wheel, my breath coming in deep, shuddering waves. I stayed there for a long time, the car a tiny metal island in the middle of nowhere. Then, I took a breath, and another. I lifted my head, put my hands back on the wheel, and pulled back onto the highway. I kept driving east. The first few days in Charleston were surreal. I existed in a self-imposed quarantine, a bubble of quiet dread. My new apartment with its high ceilings and tall, sun-drenched windows felt more like a safe house than a home. The air was different here, thick with the briny scent of the harbor and the sweet perfume of jasmine climbing the wrought iron fences. The city sounds were a constant gentle hum, a world away from the profound silence of the mountains. I felt like a spy in my own life, assembling a new identity, piece by piece. I ordered a sofa online. I bought towels. I walked the cobblestone streets of my new neighborhood, half expecting a hand to fall on my shoulder at any moment. Every buzz of my new phone made my heart leap into my throat. I was just waiting for the shockwave from the life I detonated to finally reach my shore. The first tremor arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, not as a phone call, but as a text message that lit up my screen with brutal simplicity. It was from Reese. WTF, Calla Mom and Dad are freaking out. They got a FedEx with a storage unit key. They're calling me non-stop screaming, "What did you do?" My blood ran cold. The package had arrived in Rome. The fuse was lit. I immediately called him, my hand trembling as I pressed his name. He answered instantly, his voice a panicked whisper. "Calla, what is going on? They're acting insane. Dad said something about you selling the house. He said that's not possible, right?" I sank onto the edge of my new still unmade bed. I said, my voice low and steady, forcing a calm I did not feel. "Reese, breathe, listen to me. I am so sorry to put you in this position. That was never my intention. But what position? What did you do? I sent you that money for a reason. So you wouldn't be dependent on them when this happened. Use it. That is your money now. Don't let them touch it. Don't let them talk you out of it. I promise. I will explain everything from the very beginning. But for right now, you need to just lay low. Don't answer their calls. Don't engage. Can you do that for me?" There was a long, shaky silence on his end. He finally whispered, "Oh God, Calla, you really did it, didn't you?" Before I could answer, he hung up. The main detonation occurred 48 hours later. They were home. I knew it the second my old phone, which I kept charged, but silenced in a dresser drawer, began to vibrate. It wasn't a single buzz. It was a frantic, non-stop spasm, the device rattling against the wood like a trapped animal. The screen lit up with a cascading waterfall of missed calls and text notifications. I let it go to voicemail every time. After an hour, my curiosity and my need to confirm the success of my mission got the better of me. I put on my headphones, took a deep breath, and pressed play. Voicemail 1 was from my father. His voice was tight, seething with a controlled, legalistic fury. "Calla Elizabeth Rhodes, you have made the single biggest mistake of your life. You think this is funny? You think this is a game? You have 5 minutes to call me back before I report that house stolen, and I will press charges." Click. Voicemail 2 just minutes later was my mother. The performance of a lifetime. Her voice was thick with manufactured hysterical tears. Marin sobbed, "Calla, honey, what have you done? We just got home. And there are strangers here. There's a construction fence, they said. Oh God, they said they bought our house. Your grandmother's house. There must be some terrible misunderstanding, sweetie. Please call us. We're so worried about you." Click. I took another breath and played the third one. It was Lee again, but the control was gone. The mask was gone. This was pure, uncut, sputtering rage. Lee roared, "I saw the picture. Axiom. You sold it to those vultures out of spite. To desecrate your grandmother's memory, you are a vicious, ungrateful child. You haven't just lost your home, you've lost your family. Do you hear me? We are going to sue you into oblivion. We will take every last penny you have. You will be left with nothing." Click. A strange cold calm settled over me. It was done, and they had reacted exactly as I knew they would. There was no confusion, no remorse, no self-reflection, just rage, greed, and wounded pride. It was the ultimate validation. The aftershocks rolled in over the next few days. An email arrived at my old work address, which my boss forwarded to me with a subject line that simply read, FYI. This is harassment. It was from my father, a long, rambling screed accusing me of fraud, financial abuse of the elderly, and theft. Then came the social media campaign. Vague, passive-aggressive posts on my mother's Facebook page about the unimaginable pain of being betrayed by your own child and how some people forget the sacrifices their parents made for them. The comments from their friends were a predictable chorus of sympathy and condemnation for the unnamed, monstrous daughter. I sat on the floor of my sunny Charleston apartment and listened to every voicemail again. I read every text. I read the email to my boss. My heart pounded a steady rhythmic beat, not of fear but of grim satisfaction. I meticulously saved every message, every screenshot, every recording. I created a new folder on my laptop protected by 3 layers of passwords. I labeled it the dossier. Then, with a sense of final quiet ceremony, I picked up my new phone. I opened my social media apps, Instagram, Facebook, and held my finger on them until the option appeared. Delete. Delete. I went into my contacts and found my parents' numbers. Block. Block. I turned the old phone off and placed it back in the drawer. The silence that followed was no longer empty or suspenseful. It was a fortress, and for the first time in my life I was safe inside its walls. The first few days in Charleston were surreal. I existed in a self-imposed quarantine, a bubble of quiet dread. My new apartment with its high ceilings and tall, sun-drenched windows felt more like a safe house than a home. The air was different here, thick with the briny scent of the harbor and the sweet perfume of jasmine climbing the wrought iron fences. The city sounds were a constant, gentle hum a world away from the profound silence of the mountains. I felt like a spy in my own life, assembling a new identity piece by piece. I ordered a sofa online. I bought towels. I walked the cobblestone streets of my new neighborhood, half expecting a hand to fall on my shoulder at any moment. Every buzz of my new phone made my heart leap into my throat. I was just waiting for the shockwave from the life I detonated to finally reach my shore. The first tremor arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, not as a phone call, but as a text message that lit up my screen with brutal simplicity. It was from Reese. WTF, Calla, Mom and Dad are freaking out. They got a FedEx with a storage unit key. They're calling me non-stop screaming. What did you do? My blood ran cold. The package had arrived in Rome. The fuse was lit. I immediately called him, my hand trembling as I pressed his name. Calla, what's going on? They're acting insane. Dad said something about you selling the house. He said that's not possible, right? I sank onto the edge of my new, still unmade bed. Reese, breathe, listen to me. I am so sorry to put you in this position. That was never my intention, but what position? What did you do? I sent you that money for a reason, so you wouldn't be dependent on them when this happened. Use it. That is your money now. Don't let them touch it. Don't let them talk you out of it. I promise. I will explain everything from the very beginning. But for right now, you need to just lay low. Don't answer their calls. Don't engage. Can you do that for me? There was a long, shaky silence on his end. Oh God, Calla. You really did it, didn't you? Before I could answer, he hung up. The main detonation occurred 48 hours later. They were home. I knew it the second my old phone, which I kept charged, but silenced in a dresser drawer, began to vibrate. It wasn't a single buzz. It was a frantic, non-stop spasm, the device rattling against the wood like a trapped animal. The screen lit up with a cascading waterfall of missed calls and text notifications. I let it go to voicemail every time. After an hour, my curiosity and my need to confirm the success of my mission got the better of me. I put on my headphones, took a deep breath, and pressed play. Voicemail 1 was from my father. His voice was tight, seething with a controlled legalistic fury. Calla Elizabeth Rhodes, you have made the single biggest mistake of your life. You think this is funny? You think this is a game? You have 5 minutes to call me back before I report that house stolen, and I will press charges. Click. Voicemail 2, just minutes later, was my mother. The performance of a lifetime. Her voice was thick with manufactured hysterical tears. "Calla, honey, what have you done? We just got home. And there are strangers here. There's a construction fence. They said, oh God, they said they bought our house. Your grandmother's house. There must be some terrible misunderstanding, sweetie. Please call us. We're so worried about you." Click. I took another breath and played the third one. It was Lee again. But the control was gone. The mask was gone. This was pure, uncut, sputtering rage. I saw the picture. Axiom, you sold it to those vultures out of spite, to desecrate your grandmother's memory. You are a vicious, ungrateful child. You haven't just lost your home, you've lost your family. Do you hear me? We are going to sue you into oblivion. We will take every last penny you have. You will be left with nothing. Click. A strange cold calm settled over me. It was done, and they had reacted exactly as I knew they would. There was no confusion, no remorse, no self-reflection, just rage, greed, and wounded pride. It was the ultimate validation. The aftershocks rolled in over the next few days. An email arrived at my old work address, which my boss forwarded to me with a subject line that simply read, FYI, this is harassment. It was from my father, a long, rambling screed accusing me of fraud, financial abuse of the elderly, and theft. Then came the social media campaign. Vague passive-aggressive posts on my mother's Facebook page about the unimaginable pain of being betrayed by your own child and how some people forget the sacrifices their parents made for them. The comments from their friends were a predictable chorus of sympathy and condemnation for the unnamed monstrous daughter. I sat on the floor of my sunny Charleston apartment and listened to every voicemail again. I read every text. I read the email to my boss. My heart pounded a steady rhythmic beat, not of fear, but of grim satisfaction. I meticulously saved every message, every screenshot, every recording. I created a new folder on my laptop protected by 3 layers of passwords. I labeled it the dossier. Then, with a sense of final quiet ceremony, I picked up my new phone. I opened my social media apps, Instagram, Facebook, and held my finger on them until the option appeared. Delete, delete. I went into my contacts and found my parents' numbers. Block, block. I turned the old phone off and placed it back in the drawer. The silence that followed was no longer empty or suspenseful. It was a fortress, and for the first time in my life, I was safe inside its walls. Reese's visit was a balm, but after he left to face the remainder of his finals, the adrenaline that had fueled me for weeks finally drained away, leaving behind a deep seismic exhaustion. The fortress of silence I had built was effective, but it was also lonely. I realized sitting in my beautiful sunlit apartment that I had run from the fire, but I was still covered in burns. I couldn't heal them alone. Finding a therapist felt like a concession, an admission of damage. But I knew it was necessary. I found Dr. Anya Sharma, a woman with kind eyes, and a practice that specialized in, among other things, complex family dynamics and financial abuse. Our first session was raw. I told her everything, the words spilling out in a torrent I couldn't control. Calla, what you're describing, it isn't just bad behavior. The way your parents used money guilt and the promise of their approval as tools of control, that has a name. It's a form of abuse. And the plan you overheard, the plot to declare you incompetent to seize your assets, that is its most extreme expression. Her words landed with the force of a physical blow. Abuse. I had never allowed myself to use that word. It was too ugly, too final. But hearing it from her, spoken with such clinical certainty, was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. It wasn't just a family squabble over money. It was a pattern. My father's professional jealousy of my success, my mother's tearful, manipulative enabling, and my own desperate, lifelong scramble for an approval that was always just out of reach. In that quiet, safe office, I began the painful work of demolishing the emotional structures they had built inside me and starting brick by painful brick to build my own. Part of that new construction was professional. I needed a job. I polished my portfolio, my hands shaking slightly as I included the detailed photos of the Blackwood Manor restoration. The project felt tainted now, but it was also the best work I had ever done. I landed an interview at a prestigious architectural firm on Meeting Street, Sutton Blue Designs. My new boss, a distinguished silver-haired man named Mr. Alistair Sutton, was impressed. He lingered on the photos of the hand-restored floors and the custom millwork I'd designed for the library. "This is extraordinary work, Miss Rhodes. The attention to historical detail balanced with modern livability. It's a masterclass. You have a true gift." He didn't know the half of it. He didn't know the house was gone or why. He just saw the work. And in that moment, I wasn't Lee's daughter or a burden. I was an architect, a talented one. I got the job. For the first time in years, I felt a pure, uncomplicated joy in my career, free from the suffocating shadow of my father's judgment. But of course, the past wasn't quite finished with me. My parents, having failed to break through my wall of silence, escalated their campaign. Catherine began forwarding me letters they were sending to the Asheville office, long, unhinged rambles, scrawled in my mother's dramatic cursive, accusing me of being mentally unstable, a thief, a sociopath. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to poison my professional well. I forwarded them all to Sloane. Her response was a text message that was vibrating with fury. "Oh, hell no. They have crossed a line. We are done playing defense." The next day, a formidable-looking document arrived in my inbox. It was a draft of a cease and desist letter, and it was a work of art. Sloane had cited every instance of harassment, the phone calls, the voicemails, the emails to my former boss, the slanderous letters complete with dates and times. The letter threatened not only a restraining order, but a lawsuit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress that would, as Sloane put it, make their heads spin. It was sent via certified mail to the small rental apartment they'd been forced to move into. The effect was immediate. The letters stopped. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't just my fortress. It was a legally enforced peace treaty, and I had won. That weekend, Reese drove down again. The exhaustion was gone from his eyes, replaced by a kind of gallows humor. We walked barefoot on Folly Beach, the cool Atlantic washing over our feet, and for the first time we talked openly, really talked about our parents. You know, I've been trying to figure out what to call them in my head now. Mom and Dad doesn't really fit anymore, does it? He grinned a wicked, brilliant grin. I've landed on the deposed monarchs. I burst out laughing, a real deep belly laugh that felt like releasing a pressure valve I'd been holding shut for months. It was perfect. It took their power away. It reframed them not as terrifying tyrants, but as ridiculous, self-important figures from a fallen empire. We laughed until tears streamed down our faces, a cathartic, slightly hysterical release of a lifetime of tension. That night, over a massive platter of shrimp and grits at a noisy, joyful restaurant, I looked at my brother, at his easy smile, at the fierce loyalty in his eyes. I realized that the family I had been mourning was never real. It was a phantom, a story I told myself. This was real. This easy, supportive, loving bond. In the wreckage of my old life, I had found the foundation for a new one. It wasn't built on obligation or guilt. It was built on trust, and it was stronger than any house I could ever design. Months bled into a peaceful, quiet autumn. The raw wound of my family's betrayal began to scar over the edges, puckering into something I could live with. My life in Charleston took on a comfortable rhythm. I loved my job at Sutton Blue, found a favorite coffee shop where the barista knew my order, and spent weekends with Reese, exploring the tidal creeks by kayak. The dossier on my laptop remained unopened. The old phone sat powerless in its drawer. I was healing. I was building. I let myself believe foolishly that the war was over. Then the letter arrived. It had been forwarded from my old address in Asheville, a thick, creamy envelope with the embossed logo of a prestigious law firm I didn't recognize. My hands felt cold as I slid it open. The language inside was formal, couched in the sterile dialect of the law, but the threat was unmistakable. My parents, Lee and Marin Rhodes, were formally petitioning for mediation. They framed it as a good-faith effort to reconcile and to discuss the equitable disposition of shared family assets. My blood turned to ice. Shared family assets. The audacity was breathtaking. I immediately scanned the letter and fired it off to Sloane. Her call came less than 5 minutes later. She was incandescent with rage. "Calla, this is a Trojan horse. It's a beautifully wrapped box of poison." Shared family assets. There are no shared assets. Reconciliation. They want to get you in a deposition without calling it one. They want to get you in a room under oath, find a legal loophole, trip you up, find anything they can use as leverage. You cannot go. I forbid it. A few months ago I would have agreed. I would have felt that old familiar panic, the desperate need to hide. But the woman who read that letter was not the same one who had crumpled to the floor of her kitchen. The sessions with Dr. Sharma, the support from Reese and Aunt Carol, the simple act of building a life on my own terms, it had forged something new in me. No, what do you mean, no, Calla? This is not a request. As your attorney, I am advising you in the strongest possible terms to decline. No, I won't decline. I'll go, but I'm not going to their mediation. They're going to come to mine. I could feel Sloane's stunned silence over the phone. This isn't about the law anymore, Sloane, or the money. They know they have no legal claim. This is a bluff and intimidation tactic. But they've given me an opening. I want to face them one last time, not as their frightened daughter, but as an independent adult. I need to see for myself if there is any flicker of remorse in them. I need to close this door emotionally forever. This isn't their legal battle. It's my final exam for them. Sloane was quiet for a long moment. I heard her sigh, a sound of grudging admiration. "You know, Doctor, Sharma is worth every penny you pay her." "All right, Calla Rhodes. You want to set a trap? Let's set a trap. What are your terms?" Over the next week, Sloane and I orchestrated the counteroffer. It was a masterpiece of strategic maneuvering sent from her office to theirs. We agreed to a meeting, but with a list of rigid, non-negotiable conditions. First, it would not be a legal mediation. The letter from Sloane's office stated that Calla would consent only to a professionally facilitated family discussion to address the emotional fallout of recent events. The words assets, money, and property were deliberately omitted. Second, the moderator would not be a lawyer or a retired judge of their choosing. The discussion, Sloane wrote, must be facilitated by a neutral third-party specialist in family systems therapy. We proposed Dr. Anya Sharma, citing her credentials and reputation in the field, framing it as a take-it-or-leave-it offer. Third, the venue would not be in Asheville or Charleston. We stipulated a neutral location, a private conference room at a hotel in Columbia, South Carolina, exactly halfway between their world and mine. And fourth, the final crucial condition, my brother Reese Rhodes must be invited to attend not as an observer, but as an equal participant in the discussion. Their lawyer's response was swift and tinged with condescension. They agreed to all terms. I could almost hear their triumphant thoughts through the legalese. She's caving. She's cracking. We have her. They thought they were walking into an ambush where I was the target. They had no idea that I was the one who had designed the kill box. The week before the meeting, Reese drove in from Chapel Hill. We spent 2 hours in Dr. Sharma's calm, quiet office. It wasn't a strategy session for a fight. It was a preparation for an observation. Dr. Sharma helped us define our boundaries, anticipate their tactics, and establish our own metric for success. The goal here is not to win an argument. You will not convince them of your point of view. The goal is clarity. You will state your truth calmly and without accusation, and you will observe their response. Their response is the only answer you need. We left her office with a shared sense of calm resolve. We weren't walking into that conference room seeking an apology or a reconciliation or a single dime. We were walking in for a verdict. They were the ones on trial and they didn't even know it. The conference room in Columbia was aggressively, painfully neutral. Beige walls, generic corporate art depicting abstract swirls of color, a long polished table that reflected the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. A pitcher of ice water was already sweating onto the wood. It was a room designed for bloodless transactions, and in a way that's exactly what this was. Reese and I sat on one side of the table with Dr. Sharma at the head, her calm presence a silent anchor in the tense room. Then they walked in, the deposed monarchs. My mother, Marin, was dressed in shades of gray and charcoal, a costume of tasteful grief, a black cashmere wrap draped over her shoulders. She looked fragile, her eyes already puffy. My father, Lee, wore a navy suit that was just a little too tight across the shoulders, an attempt to project a power he no longer had. Flanking them was their lawyer, a man with a smug, self-satisfied expression, who gave me a nod that was more of a dismissal. Dr. Sharma had been clear he was present only as a non-speaking observer. He clearly thought that was a suggestion, not a rule. He was wrong. They sat down opposite us. The air crackled with unspoken history. As planned, Dr. Sharma opened the meeting. Thank you all for coming. The goal of this facilitated discussion is to create a space for open and honest communication. Lee, Marin, perhaps you'd like to begin by sharing what brought you here today. It was the invitation they'd been waiting for. The performance began. Marin spoke first, dabbing at her eyes with a delicate antique lace handkerchief she'd probably chosen specifically for the occasion. Thank you, Doctor. We're here because our family is broken. Our daughter, Kala, has made some choices that we can't understand, Dot. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. She sold my mother's home, Genevieve's home. It wasn't just a house, it was memories. It was our legacy, and now it's gone. All we want is to understand why she would hurt us like this. My father jumped in, his voice booming with a righteous indignation that had once terrified me. It's about more than a house. It's about the sanctity of family. It's about respect. It's about a shocking and vicious betrayal. We dedicated our lives to our children, and this is how we're repaid. We are here to see if there is any piece of the daughter we raised left in there. Reese and I remained silent, our expressions neutral. We just watched, observed. Dr. Sharma let the silence hang for a moment before she calmly redirected the conversation. Thank you for sharing that. Kala and Reese have also expressed that they feel their relationship with you has been contingent on certain expectations. Kala, she said, turning her kind, steady gaze to me, would you like to share your experience? This was it. I felt Reese's knee press against mine under the table, a small, grounding gesture of solidarity. I looked past my mother's tear-streaked face, past the lawyer's smug smirk, and locked eyes with my father. My voice, when it came, was as steady and cool as the water in the pitcher between us. I am not here to discuss the house. The house was a symptom of a much deeper problem. I am here because I need to know if you understand why I felt I had no other choice. I am here because you called me a burden, and because you plotted to have me declared incompetent so you could take control of my life. The change in the room was instantaneous. It was as if I'd thrown a live grenade onto the polished table. Their composure shattered. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. We were stressed. We were in a foreign country. It was just talk. You weren't supposed to hear it. An admission. A pathetic, flustered, self-serving admission. My father's reaction was far more telling. His face began to model a tide of furious red climbing his neck. The mask of the concerned patriarch dissolved into the twisted sneer of a cornered narcissist. Incompetent, you sold a multi-million-dollar legacy for a quick buck to a company that stands for everything I despise. You did that to hurt me personally. That's not competence, that's malice. You have been selfish and difficult your entire life. And there it was, the verdict, delivered by the defendant himself. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He justified it. He proved in that one explosive tirade that his outrage had never been about my well-being. It was about his thwarted ego, his lost control, his fury that the burden had suddenly developed a spine of solid steel. In the ringing silence that followed his outburst, another voice cut through, quiet but unwavering. It was Reese. She paid for my education when you threatened to cut me off. She protected me. He then turned his gaze to our mother. What have either of you ever done but tell us what we owed you? That was it. The final irrefutable truth. Dr. Sharma looked from Lee's apoplectic face to Marin's stunned silence. It seems we have a fundamental disagreement on the nature of the problem here. I stood up my chair, making a soft scraping sound. The movement was final. I looked at the two people who had created me, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a vast empty sense of clarity. Thank you for the clarity. I have my answer. I turned, and without a backward glance, Reese and I walked out of the room. We left them there, my father sputtering, my mother looking utterly lost, and their lawyer staring after us, his mouth agape, finally realizing he'd brought his clients to a gunfight armed with a butter knife. The verdict was in. They were guilty, and they felt no remorse. The final tie wasn't just cut. It had disintegrated into dust. 1 year can feel like a lifetime, or in my case, the beginning of one. The woman I was now, 1 year after walking out of that sterile conference room in Columbia, would have been unrecognizable to the girl who had crumpled on her kitchen floor. I was the new lead designer at Sutton Blue, a title I had earned with 60-hour work weeks and a portfolio of projects that were bold, innovative, and unapologetically mine. I moved with a confidence that came not from arrogance, but from the deep, quiet certainty of knowing your own worth. My relationship with Reese was the solid bedrock of my life. He had graduated with honors from UNC and had just accepted a fantastic job at a landscape architecture firm in Atlanta. We talked almost every day, quick texts with stupid jokes, long Sunday night phone calls to dissect our weeks. We were each other's biggest fans. But a question still lingered in the back of my mind in the quiet moments late at night. The money. The $1.95 million minus Reese's trust fund and my startup costs sat in a series of conservatively managed investment accounts growing steadily. To Sloane, I sometimes jokingly referred to it as the blood money, a term that made her wince, but that felt accurate. It was the price of my freedom bought with the currency of betrayal and loss, and I knew I couldn't just live off it. It had to mean something more. It had to be redeemed. The idea came to me on a rainy Tuesday while I was sketching a design for a community arts center. I was thinking about Genevieve, about the foundation she had given me, not just the house, but the foundation of self-worth, of independence. The money wasn't a burden, it was a tool, and I finally knew what I had to build. I called Sloane that evening. I know what to do with the money. I want to start a foundation, in Genevieve's name. I laid out the plan. I had already spoken to a financial advisor about the logistics of charitable endowments. I had already sketched out a mission statement. I could hear Sloane smiling on the other end of the line. Well, look at you, Calla Rhodes. Building empires. What's it called? The Genevieve Rhodes Foundation for Young Independence. Its mission was simple and fiercely personal. We would provide two things: financial grants and pro bono legal support for young adults aged 18 to 25 who were trying to extricate themselves from financially abusive or controlling family situations. It was a direct, targeted response to the hell I had survived. It was the armor I wished I'd had now offered to others. Our first project was a series of workshops we developed in partnership with several universities in the Carolinas. The title was Building Your Own Walls, A Guide to Financial and Legal Autonomy. I threw myself into designing the curriculum, my old pain now a resource. I wrote the section on recognizing emotional manipulation, my parents' words echoing in my memory as I typed out bullet points on gaslighting and guilt tripping. I designed the module on understanding legal documents, remembering the blizzard of paperwork from the closing. For the first time, the trauma didn't feel like a scar. It felt like a textbook, one I could use to teach others how to navigate the battlefield I had crossed. It was the most meaningful work I had ever done. One afternoon, a small stack of forwarded mail arrived at my apartment. Tucked between catalogs and junk mail was a glossy magazine. It was the annual alumni journal from my father's small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. I almost threw it away, but a strange clinical curiosity made me pause. I sat on my sofa, the warm Charleston sun streaming through the windows, and opened it. I flipped past the articles about campus expansions and successful alumni. I found the class notes section organized by year. There, under the class of 1988, was a short, cheerful paragraph. Leland Rhodes and his wife Marin report that they have happily retired to a beautiful new condominium in Myrtle Beach, SC. They are enjoying long walks on the beach, reconnecting with old friends, and are currently planning their next grand tour of Europe. I read the words once, then twice. There was a photo, a selfie of the two of them smiling broadly, the ocean behind them. They looked happy, content. The aggrieved victims of my monstrous betrayal had apparently landed on their feet, and I felt nothing. No, that's not right. I felt something. A vast, quiet, peaceful distance. The anger was gone, the hurt was gone. All that was left was the quiet, settled understanding that they had their story, their curated narrative of a blissful retirement, and I had mine. Our two truths would never intersect again. They were just two people I used to know living in a condo in Myrtle Beach. The book was closed. The air on the rooftop deck was warm and soft, carrying the scent of salt from the harbor and the faint sweet perfume of night-blooming jasmine from the planters I'd installed. Below us, the lights of Charleston glittered like a fallen constellation, the steeple of St. Michael's a familiar silhouette against the deepening twilight. It was the 2-year anniversary of the day I sold Blackwood Manor, a day that had once felt like an ending, but which I now knew was a beginning. Laughter, easy and genuine, bubbled around me. Reese was deep in a mock-serious debate with Sloane about the architectural merits of brutalism, while my friends from work, Maya and Ben, were topping up wine glasses. This was my chosen family, a circle of people built not on obligation or shared blood, but on shared laughter, mutual respect, and the simple, uncomplicated joy of being in each other's presence. This was my home. My phone sitting on the table buzzed with a notification. Idly, I picked it up. It was a news alert from the Asheville Business Journal, a subscription I'd forgotten to cancel. The headline made my breath catch in my throat. Axiom Development breaks ground on controversial Blackwood Terraces project. There was a photo, a wide aerial shot of a construction site, where the lush green lawn and the sprawling, welcoming arms of my grandmother's house had once stood. There was now just churned red earth concrete foundations and the skeletal beginnings of a steel frame. It was a scar on the side of the mountain. For a single sharp moment I felt a pang. It wasn't regret. It was a ghostly echo of the loss, a flicker of sadness for the beautiful thing that had to be sacrificed for the memories that now had no physical home. It was the last faint tremor of a long-finished earthquake. Then I looked up from the screen. I saw Reese laughing, his face open and happy. I saw Sloane rolling her eyes in mock exasperation. I saw the warm, welcoming faces of my friends illuminated by the soft glow of the string lights I'd hung, and the feeling passed as quickly as it had come. The house was a chapter, a beautiful, painful, necessary chapter, but it wasn't the whole story. This rooftop, these people, this life, this was the story I was writing now. As if sensing the shift in my mood, Reese caught my eye. He smiled a slow, warm smile that reached deep into his eyes. He picked up his wine glass. The chatter around the table quieted. I'd like to make a toast. He looked directly at me, to Calla, who builds beautiful things. The words, Genevieve's words, hung in the warm night air. They were no longer just a memory from a faded note. They were a living truth, spoken aloud by the person who mattered most. A genuine, unburdened smile spread across my face, feeling as natural as breathing. I raised my glass to my brother, my friend, my family. Later, as the laughter and conversation swirled around me like a warm current, I walked over to the edge of the deck, looking out at the dark, expansive harbor. Burden. The word came to me not as a wound, but as a clinical specimen to be examined. For so long I had carried it. I had let them place it on my shoulders, this impossible weight of their expectations, their disappointments, their unfulfilled dreams. The true burden wasn't my existence or my needs or the cost of my education. The true burden was the exhausting, soul-crushing effort of trying to earn a love that should have been my birthright. Selling the house hadn't just given me financial freedom, it had given me permission to set that weight down, to finally once and for all stop trying, to walk away. I am not defined by the family I lost. I am defined by the life I have built. I am defined by the foundation I started, by the people I now help, by the joy I find in my work, by the fierce protective love I feel for my brother, and by the easy accepting warmth of the friends who surround me. The view from here, from this new life I chose, that I earned, that I built from the ground up, it's vast, it's clear, and it's all mine. I took a deep breath of the salty air, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, my lungs felt completely and utterly full. I was finally truly unburdened. That's my story. It's strange looking back on it all from here, from this place of peace. For the longest time I thought the story was about a house, about an inheritance, a betrayal, and a transaction. But it was never really about the house. It was about the weight. We all carry weight, don't we? The weight of our responsibilities, our ambitions, our own mistakes. But there's another kind of weight, a heavier kind. It's the weight of other people's expectations, especially the expectations of the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally. It's the feeling that you have to constantly perform, to achieve, to provide, just to earn your place in your own family. That's not love, it's a job, and it's a burden no one is meant to carry. Drawing a boundary, especially with family, can feel like an act of war. People will tell you you're being selfish or cruel or ungrateful, but sometimes building a wall isn't about shutting others out. It's about finally giving yourself a safe place to grow. It's about protecting your own peace. My therapist once told me something that has stuck with me ever since. She said, "The heaviest things we carry are not our responsibilities, but the expectations we were never meant to bear." I had to make a drastic choice. To some, selling the house might have seemed like an act of revenge, and maybe there was a small wounded part of me that felt a grim satisfaction in it. But truly, it was an act of survival. It was the only way I could set that weight down and walk away, not from them, but from the person they expected me to be. It was the only way to become myself. But that's just my story and my perspective. I've often wondered what would have happened if I had tried to confront them first before taking action. Do you think it would have made a difference? Or would it have just given them another chance to manipulate me? If this story made you think about the invisible weights you might be carrying, I'd be honored if you shared your thoughts in a comment. What do you think about the final choice? Was it justified? If you have a different opinion, please share it in the comments below. And if you believe that our stories are our greatest teachers, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for listening.